Standing at the back of the church, I watched as guests filed in, filling the pews with their Sunday best and excited chatter. My heart raced as I clutched the small gift box I'd brought, a pocket watch that had belonged to my father, intended for my son on his wedding day. Just as I stepped forward to find my seat, my former mother-in-law Margaret spotted me. Her smile dropped instantly. She marched down the aisle, her expensive heels clicking against the marble floor, and blocked my path. "You aren't welcome here," she hissed, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "We agreed you wouldn't show your face." The church went quiet. Dozens of eyes turned in our direction. My stomach knotted as I saw my son Tyler approaching from the side room, his face a mix of concern and determination. Before Margaret could say another word, Tyler stepped between us. He pulled an envelope from his suit pocket and held it up, for everyone to see. "I think it's time everyone knew the truth," he said. That was the moment everything changed. But to understand how we got there, you need to know what happened in the years leading up to my son's wedding day. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My name is Daniel Carson. I'm 58 years old, a high school history teacher, and the proud father of a son I almost lost, not to death or disaster, but to a web of lies so intricate it took 20 years to unravel. When I first met Stephanie, Tyler's mother, we were young and in love in ways that felt eternal. We married quickly, had Tyler within a year, and settled into what I thought would be our forever life in a small New England town. What I didn't account for was the suffocating presence of her family, particularly her mother, Margaret, who believed her daughter had married beneath her station. Margaret came from old money, the kind that's been in the same family for generations, attached to a last name that opened doors. I was a public school teacher with student loan debt and a beat-up Honda. In Margaret's eyes, this was an unforgivable combination. From the beginning, she made it clear that she had expected better for her daughter. At family gatherings, she would introduce me as Stephanie's husband, the teacher, with a slight emphasis that transformed my profession from a calling into a disappointment. She would reminisce about Stephanie's ex-boyfriend Richard, who had gone on to become a surgeon, carefully glancing my way to ensure I caught the comparison. For years, I smiled through it. I helped set the table at Thanksgiving, brought wine. At Christmas, coached Tyler's Little League team, and tried to prove my worth through presence and persistence. Stephanie would occasionally defend me, but more often she'd whisper, "That's just how Mom is. Don't take it personally." But it was impossible not to take it personally when someone is strategically dismantling your sense of belonging, one small cut at a time. When Tyler was 8, cracks began to show in our marriage. Stephanie had taken a job at her father's investment firm, and the hours were long. I picked up the slack at home, becoming both mother and father most evenings. I didn't mind. Tyler and I developed a special bond during those years. We built science projects together, started a vegetable garden in the backyard, and had standing Friday movie nights with homemade popcorn. While Stephanie climbed the corporate ladder, I was the one helping Tyler with homework, attending parent-teacher conferences, and nursing him through strep throat and broken bones. By the time Tyler turned 12, Stephanie had changed. That woman I married, who had once loved camping trips and spontaneous ice cream runs, now found those things beneath her. She joined her mother's country club, began playing tennis with the right sort of people, and subtly suggested that my wardrobe and manners needed upgrading if I wanted to accompany her to work functions. I made efforts to fit into her new world, but I always felt like an imposter in pressed slacks and borrowed confidence. The end came swiftly after 14 years of marriage. I came home early from a teacher conference to find Stephanie packing suitcases. "I can't do this anymore," she said without looking up. "We want different things." The "we" in her statement wasn't about us. It was about her and her family, a realization that hit me like a physical blow. She had already secured an apartment closer to her parents, already enrolled Tyler in an exclusive private school her family would pay for, already consulted a lawyer who specialized in making divorces as painless as possible for people of means. "What about Tyler?" I asked, my voice breaking. "He needs both of us." "He'll still have both of us," she replied smoothly. "But let's be practical. My job pays 3 times what you make. I can give him opportunities you simply can't. My parents have connections for college, for internships." She trailed off, but the implication was clear. What could I possibly offer that would compete with that? The divorce was civil on paper, but brutal in reality. I didn't fight for the house. I couldn't afford the mortgage alone anyway. I didn't demand alimony. My pride wouldn't allow it. I focused entirely on one thing: maintaining my relationship with my son. We agreed to joint custody, with Tyler living primarily with Stephanie but spending weekends and part of summer breaks with me. It was far less than I wanted, but her lawyer made it clear that if I pushed, things could get much worse. I downsized to a 2-bedroom apartment across town and furnished Tyler's room first, leaving my own space spartan and functional. I picked up extra coaching duties at school to earn money for child support, and to ensure I could still take Tyler on modest vacations and buy him decent birthday gifts. I was determined that my son would never feel the financial disparity between his 2 homes, even if it meant I ate ramen 3 nights a week. For the first year, our arrangement worked reasonably well. Tyler stayed with me every other weekend, and we maintained our traditions: Friday movie nights, Sunday morning pancakes, long bike rides through conservation land. At 13, he was caught between childhood and adolescence, sometimes wanting space and sometimes still climbing onto the couch for comfort after a bad day. I treasured every moment, knowing that the older he got, the more his social life would pull him away from these simple pleasures. Then Margaret got involved. It started with scheduling conflicts. Tyler would call on Friday afternoon, apology thick in his voice, to say that something had come up: a special dinner with his grandparents, a classmate's birthday party. He couldn't miss extra tutoring for a subject he was suddenly struggling with. One weekend became 2, then 3. When we did have our time together, he seemed distracted, checking his phone constantly. Our conversations grew stilted, peppered with references to places I'd never been and people I'd never met. By the time Tyler was 14, our once close relationship had become a series of awkward visits and half-finished conversations. I tried talking to Stephanie about it, but she brushed off my concerns. "He's a teenager, Daniel. They pull away. It's normal." But there was nothing normal about the speed and completeness of the distance growing between us. The summer Tyler turned 15, he was supposed to spend 3 weeks with me. We had planned a road trip to Washington, D.C., something he'd been excited about since his class studied American history. 3 days before he was due to arrive, Stephanie called. "There's been a change of plans," she said, her voice artificially bright. "My parents are taking Tyler to Europe for the month. It's an incredible opportunity. London, Paris, Rome. You understand, right?" I didn't understand. I had requested time off work, mapped our route, booked budget hotels. More importantly, this was our time. Court-mandated time that was being casually erased by people who believed their money entitled them to rewrite the rules. "No," I said firmly. "I don't understand. We have an agreement, Stephanie. He's supposed to be with me." "Don't be difficult," she sighed. "This isn't about you. It's about what's best for Tyler." What's best for Tyler is having both parents in his life, consistently. There was a pause before she replied, her voice cooler now. "Look, the tickets are purchased. The itinerary is set. Tyler is really looking forward to it. If you love him, you'll want him to have this experience." It was emotional manipulation, plain and simple, but effective. What kind of father would deny his son a trip to Europe? What kind of man would make his child feel guilty for wanting something so extraordinary? I relented, swallowing my disappointment and legal rights in one bitter gulp. "Can I at least see him before he goes?" I asked. "They leave tomorrow morning," Stephanie replied. "Early flight. It's just not practical. I'll have him call you from London." He did call, once, from a busy street in London, the connection. "Spotty!" His voice rushed as his grandmother urged him to hurry up in the background. That 3-minute conversation was the only contact I had with my son for the entire month. When Tyler returned, bronzed and buzzing with stories of European adventures, something fundamental had shifted. His bedroom at my apartment suddenly seemed childish to him. The day trips I could afford paled in comparison to gondola rides in Venice. Even our movie nights felt obsolete now that he'd attended a real premiere in London, courtesy of one of Margaret's connections. I was losing him, inch by inch, to a world I couldn't compete with. But it wasn't just the material things, it was the narrative being constructed around me. Comments Tyler made revealed the story being told when I wasn't there. Poor Daniel. So dedicated, but so limited. He means well, but he doesn't understand the real world. Your father loves you, but he can't provide what we can. By 16, Tyler was spending less and less time at my apartment. His weekends became filled with activities I wasn't invited to: sailing lessons, college tours, fundraising galas where Stephanie's family had purchased entire tables. When I called to talk to him, he was often studying or out with friends. When I texted, the replies were delayed and brief. The confident, curious boy who had once been my shadow was disappearing into a life that had no space for me. I tried everything to maintain our connection. I attended every school event possible, even when it meant sitting rows away from Stephanie and her parents, who would acknowledge me with tight smiles before turning away. I sent thoughtful texts about things Tyler was interested in. I learned about his new hobbies and tried to engage him in conversations about them. But there was an invisible barrier growing between us, constructed of privilege and subtle messaging about what kind of man was worthy of respect. The final blow came during Tyler's senior year of high school. Stephanie called me on a Tuesday evening, her voice oddly formal. "We need to discuss Tyler's college plans," she said. "My father has connections at Dartmouth. It's basically settled. But there are some financial details to work out." "What do you mean, basically settled?" I asked. "Tyler hasn't even finished applying to schools yet. We talked about him looking at state universities too." There was a pause, then a soft, condescending laugh. "Daniel, be realistic. With his grades and my father's alumni status, Dartmouth is the obvious choice. The application is a formality." "Maybe so," I countered. "But shouldn't this be Tyler's decision? We agreed to make major parenting choices together. This is what's best for his future," she insisted. "My parents are willing to cover tuition completely. You couldn't possibly contribute meaningfully to an Ivy League education on your salary." The comment stung because it contained an element of truth. I couldn't afford Dartmouth or any private university without substantial financial aid. But this wasn't about money. It was about completely cutting me out of a life-altering decision for my son. "I want to talk to Tyler about this," I said. "He's on board," Stephanie replied quickly. "He knows this is an incredible opportunity." But something in her tone made me suspicious. "Let me speak to him directly." "He's not home right now. Some function with my parents." "Then I'll call him tomorrow." "Fine," she said tersely. "But don't make this harder than it needs to be. For once, think about what Tyler wants, not what you want." It was a masterful inversion, making my desire to be included in my son's life seem selfish. I hung up feeling like I'd been outmaneuvered, yet again. When I called Tyler the next day, he sounded uncomfortable. Yes, he was applying to Dartmouth. Yes, his grandfather had made some calls. No, he hadn't mentioned it to me because he knew I'd be disappointed he wasn't considering state schools. The conversation was strained, filled with the echoes of things other people had told him about me and my expectations. "I thought we talked about visiting some campuses together," I said, trying to keep the hurt from my voice. "Making these decisions as a family." "I know, Dad," he sighed, "but this is a really big opportunity. Grandpa says, I don't care." "What your grandfather says," I interrupted, a rare flash of frustration breaking through. "I care what you want, and I care about being part of these conversations." There was a long silence before Tyler spoke again, his voice suddenly smaller. "Younger. Mom said you'd try to hold me back, that you don't understand what these kinds of connections can do for my future." The words hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about college. It was about a systematic campaign to redefine me, in my son's eyes. To transform me from the dad who had bandaged his knees and cheered at his games into someone who would limit his potential out of my own insecurity. "Tyler, that's not true," I said quietly. "I've never wanted anything but the best for you. All I'm asking is to be included in the process, to visit schools with you, to talk about what you really want, not what your grandparents want for you." "I have to go," he said abruptly. "We can talk about this later." We never did talk about it. Tyler applied to Dartmouth Early Decision and was accepted by December. Margaret hosted an elaborate celebration dinner at their country club. I wasn't invited. When I asked Tyler about it afterward, he seemed surprised. "I didn't think you'd want to come," he said. "It's not really your scene." The words weren't his. They were a perfect echo of something he'd been told about me. The spring of Tyler's senior year was a series of similar exclusions. His 18th birthday party was held at the yacht club. I received a formal invitation 3 days before, almost as an afterthought. When I arrived, I was seated at a table far from the family, with a couple of teachers and distant relatives. The graduation dinner was at a restaurant where the cheapest entree cost more than I typically spent on groceries for a week. I attended, bought a gift I couldn't afford, and watched as Margaret dominated the event, introducing Tyler to valuable connections while I stood awkwardly at the periphery. By the time Tyler left for college, our relationship had been reduced to obligatory phone calls and occasional stilted visits. The child I had raised for 18 years had been remolded into someone who viewed me with a mix of affection and mild embarrassment. It was subtle but unmistakable, the way he would tense slightly when I spoke in front of his mother's family, the quick glances to gauge their reaction to my presence, the relief when our time together came to an end. I grieved that loss silently, throwing myself into my work and trying to respect the boundaries my son seemed to want. I told myself that someday, when he was older and forming his own identity separate from his mother's family, we might reconnect, on more authentic terms. It was a hope I clung to during lonely holidays and the long stretches without communication. Tyler thrived at Dartmouth, just as everyone expected. He majored in business with a minor in art history, a combination that pleased both his practical mother and his culturally conscious grandparents. He joined the right fraternity, made the right friends, and seemed destined for the future. His mother's family had mapped out for him. Our contact dwindled to holiday texts and the occasional update email, usually containing carefully curated news of his achievements. During Tyler's sophomore year, I received an unexpected phone call. It was nearly midnight on a Tuesday, and I was grading papers when my cell phone lit up with his name. "Dad?" His voice sounded different, uncertain, younger somehow. "Tyler, is everything okay?" I straightened in my chair, instantly alert. "Yeah, He paused, and I could hear him take a deep breath. "I'm taking this class on family systems, and we had to create a genogram, like a family tree but with relationships mapped out, and I realized I don't know anything about your side of the family. Not really." It was such a simple observation, but it cracked something open between us. For the next hour, I told him about my parents, his grandparents whom he barely remembered, about my childhood in a small rental house with a father who worked construction and a mother who cleaned. Houses, but who had filled our modest home with books and music. I told him about my 3 sisters, his aunts, who had scattered across the country. I shared family stories that he had never heard, traditions that had been replaced by the more sophisticated customs of his mother's family. "Why didn't you ever tell me these things before?" he asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "I tried," I said gently, "when you were younger, but at some point it seemed like you weren't interested in that part of your heritage." There was a long silence before he replied. "I think I was told it wasn't important." It was the first acknowledgement, however subtle, that his perspective had been shaped by others. We talked for another hour, the longest conversation we'd had in years. Before hanging up, he hesitated. "Dad, can I call you again sometime to hear more?" "Any time," I said, afraid to sound too eager. "Day or night, I'm always here." That call marked the beginning of a cautious reconnection. It wasn't dramatic. There were no tearful confessions or sudden revelations, just occasional late-night conversations about family history, about my college years, about books we'd both read or movies we'd both seen. Small bridges being rebuilt over a chasm years in the making. The summer after his junior year, Tyler did something that shocked everyone. He announced he wanted to spend a month with me instead of taking the internship his grandfather had arranged at a prestigious financial firm. Stephanie called me immediately after he told her, her voice tight with accusation. "What did you say to him?" she demanded. "This internship is a guaranteed path to a job after graduation. Why would he throw that away?" "I didn't say anything," I replied truthfully. This was his decision. "It doesn't make any sense," she insisted. "He's never expressed any interest in whatever it is you're planning to do for a month." The dismissive tone was familiar, the implication that nothing I could offer would be valuable. "I think he just wants some time to figure things out on his own terms," I said. "Without pressure," she scoffed. "Pressure is part of the real world, Daniel. The sooner he learns that, the better." Despite her objections, Tyler arrived at my apartment in June. The Tyler who showed up was different from the polished young man I had glimpsed at holidays. He was quieter, more thoughtful, somehow both older and younger than his 20 years. For the first few days, there was an awkwardness between us, as though we were both following a script for father and son, without really knowing our lines. Then, on the 4th night, something shifted. We were sitting on my small balcony, watching the sunset and drinking beer, him legally now, a strange realization. Without preamble, he asked, "Why did you let them push you away?" The directness of the question caught me off guard. "I didn't think I had a choice," I admitted after a moment. "Your mother's family had everything: money, influence, the ability to give you opportunities I couldn't match. Fighting them seemed selfish when they could offer you so much." Tyler was quiet for a long time, rolling the beer bottle between his palms. "I used to think you didn't care enough to fight for me," he said finally. "Grandma would say things like, 'Your father has his own life now,' or 'Some men aren't cut out for the demands of family.' And Mom never contradicted her." The revelation hurt, but it wasn't surprising. "I never stopped fighting for you," I said quietly. "I just didn't know how to fight people who changed the rules whenever it suited them." He nodded slowly. "I'm starting to see that." That conversation broke. Something opened between us. Over the next few weeks, Tyler shared more about his childhood from his perspective, the gradual reshaping of his image of me, the subtle and not-so-subtle messages about what kind of men deserved respect, the way his grandparents had positioned themselves as the arbiters of his future while painting me as a well-meaning but ultimately inconsequential figure in his life. "I think I always knew something wasn't right," he confessed one evening, "but it was easier to go along with it, to believe what they were telling me." "You were a child," I said. It wasn't your responsibility to see through adult manipulation. During that month, we rebuilt something I had thought was lost forever. We took a road trip to the mountains, hiked trails I had explored in my youth, talked for hours around campfires. Tyler met my sisters, his aunts, properly for the first time since he was small. He pored over old photo albums, asking questions about his early childhood, filling in gaps in his own history. When August arrived and it was time for him to return to school, something fundamental had changed. "I'll call every week," he promised, and for once, I believed him. He kept that promise through his senior year. Our conversations grew deeper, more honest. He confided that he wasn't sure he wanted the finance career his grandfather had mapped out for him, that he was considering teaching or nonprofit work instead. I listened without pushing, offering support without direction. When graduation approached, Tyler called with unexpected news. "I'm seeing someone," he said, a smile in his voice. "Her name is Sophia. She's an art history major, brilliant, kind. You'd like her." "I'd love to meet her," I said sincerely. "That's good," he replied, "because it's getting serious. Really serious." They had been dating for nearly 2 years, I learned. He had kept the relationship private from everyone, even his mother, until he was certain of his feelings. Sophia came from a middle-class family in Colorado, had put herself through college on scholarships, and planned to work in museum education. She was, in almost every way, the opposite of what Margaret would have chosen for her grandson. I met Sophia at Tyler's graduation. She was warm, unpretentious, and clearly adored. "My son." I watched Margaret's tight smile as Tyler introduced his girlfriend to the family, noting the evaluating glance that took in Sophia's sensible shoes and department store dress. Stephanie was more welcoming, but clearly reserved, her eyes conveying a silent question to Tyler. "Is this really what you want?" 6 months later, Tyler called me at midnight again, his voice vibrating with excitement. "I asked Sophia to marry me," he blurted out before I could even say hello. "She said yes." Joy surged through me. "That's wonderful news. Congratulations." "There's more," he continued. "I've accepted a teaching position at a private school in Vermont. It's not prestigious, but it feels right. And Sophia got a job at a small museum nearby. We're moving there after the wedding." I knew, without him saying it, how this news would be received by his mother's family. A teaching job, a small town, a bride without connections or fortune. It was a complete rejection of the future they had planned for him. "Are you happy?" I asked simply. "Happier than I've been in a long time," he replied. "Maybe ever." "Then I'm thrilled for you, for both of you." The engagement announcement created exactly the ripples I expected. Stephanie called me in a state of controlled panic. "Did you know about this? Did you encourage this?" I knew Tyler was serious about Sophia, I said calmly. "And yes, I encouraged him to follow his heart. She's a wonderful person." "She's a nobody," Stephanie hissed. "And this teaching job? He's throwing away a Harvard Business School acceptance. For what? To live in obscurity in Vermont?" "To live authentically," I replied. "To build the life he wants, not the one someone else designed for him." There was a long silence before Stephanie spoke again, her voice cooler now. "My parents are very upset. They've invested a lot in Tyler's future." "Tyler isn't an investment portfolio," I said. "He's a grown man making his own choices." The conversation ended there, but the tension had just begun. Over the next few months, as wedding plans progressed, Margaret launched a subtle campaign to reshape the event into something grander, more aligned with her social standing. The small ceremony Tyler and Sophia wanted gradually expanded under her influence. A larger venue, a more extensive guest list, more elaborate decorations. Tyler confided his frustration during our weekly calls. "Grandma keeps talking about family traditions and appropriate standards, as if this wedding is more about the Monroe name than about what Sophia and I want. "Have you talked to your mother about it?" I asked. "Mom says I should appreciate Grandma's generosity. That she's just trying to give us a beautiful day." I could hear the conflict in his voice, the desire to please the family that had shaped so much of his life versus the need to assert his independence. "What does Sophia think?" I asked. There was a pause. "She's trying to be gracious, but I can tell she's uncomfortable. This isn't what we planned. It feels like our wedding is being hijacked." 2 months before the wedding, Margaret's interference reached a critical point. Tyler called me, his voice tight with anger. "You won't believe what Grandma did," he said without preamble. "She revised our guest list without telling us, cut some of Sophia's family to make room for her club friends. When Sophia objected, Grandma said something about maintaining certain standards and reminded us who was paying for the reception." I listened as he vented his frustration, careful not to inflame the situation further. When he finally ran out of steam, I asked gently, "What do you want to do about it?" "I don't know," he admitted. "Part of me wants to cancel the whole thing and elope, but another part, I've never stood up to them, not really. I've always gone along to keep the peace. You're not obligated to accept control disguised as generosity," I said carefully. "This is your wedding, yours and Sophia's. It should reflect what matters to both of you." There was a long silence before Tyler replied, his voice firmer now. "You're right. I need to talk to Mom and Grandma, set some boundaries." I didn't hear the details of that conversation, but its effects rippled outward. Stephanie called me the next day, her voice cold with accusation. "What exactly have you been telling Tyler? He just had a very disrespectful conversation with my mother." "I encouraged him to speak his mind about his own wedding," I replied evenly. "That's hardly inappropriate. My parents are contributing a significant amount of money to this event," she countered. "That gives them some say in how it's conducted." "Financial contribution doesn't equal ownership," I said. "And Tyler is 32 years old. It's time for everyone to respect his decisions, whether they agree with them or not." And I could practically hear her teeth grinding. "This isn't like you, Daniel. You've never interfered before." The comment revealed more than she intended, an acknowledgement that for years I had stepped aside, allowed myself to be marginalized in my son's life. "I'm not interfering," I said quietly. "I'm supporting my son's right to have the wedding he and his fiancée want. That's not interference. It's being a father." After that conversation, things escalated quickly. Margaret apparently issued an ultimatum. Either the wedding proceeded according to her vision, or she would withdraw her financial support entirely. Tyler and Sophia, to everyone's surprise, chose the latter. They scaled back their plans, opted for a simple church ceremony with a reception at a local restaurant, and prepared to cover the costs themselves. I offered to contribute what I could. My savings were modest, but I wanted to help. Tyler accepted gratefully, and for the first time in decades, I felt like an equal parent, not an afterthought. As the wedding approached, the family divide deepened. Margaret refused to attend any pre-wedding events that Sophia's family hosted. Stephanie tried to play mediator, but clearly sided with her mother in private. The tension was palpable in every interaction, a slow-building pressure that seemed destined to erupt. 1 week before the wedding, Tyler called me, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "Dad, there's something I need to tell you, something I just found out." My heart sank, anticipating yet another conflict. "What is it?" "It's about why you and Mom really divorced," he said quietly. "About what really happened back then." I felt a chill run through me. After 20 years, I thought all the secrets were out, all the wounds cauterized by time. "What do you mean?" I asked carefully. "I found Mom's old journals," Tyler explained, his voice gaining strength. "She kept them in a box in the attic. I was helping her organize some things for the wedding and came across them. Dad, she wrote about everything, about how Grandma pressured her to leave you, about how they planned it all. My hands tightened around the phone. Tyler, I'm not sure this is something we should discuss right before your wedding. The past isn't past if it's still affecting us, he interrupted, an edge in his voice I'd never heard before. Mom wrote that Grandma gave her an ultimatum: leave you and get financial support for life, or stay and be cut off completely. She wrote about how they strategized to limit your time with me, how they deliberately scheduled things during your weekends. There were actual lists, Dad. Ways to minimize Daniel's influence. They treated you like a threat that needed to be contained. I closed my eyes, decades of suspicions confirmed in an instant. All those scheduling conflicts, those last-minute changes, the gradual alienation, it hadn't been coincidence or bad luck. It had been deliberate, calculated, a long-term strategy to sever the bond between father and son. Did your mother know you found these journals? I asked. Yes, we had a difficult conversation. She tried to explain it away, said she was young and confused, that her parents had a strong influence on her. But Dad, these entries continued for years, long after I was in college. The last one was from just 3 years ago, when I told them I was seeing Sophia. I couldn't find words immediately. The confirmation of what I had suspected but never wanted to believe, that my ex-wife and her family had systematically worked to erase me from my son's life, was both validating and devastating. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, I finally said. But Tyler, this is your wedding week. Your focus should be on Sophia, on your future together. But don't you see? His voice cracked slightly. This changes everything. Every memory I have is tainted now. Every time I chose them over you, every event you weren't included in, it was all by design. And I played right into it, Dad. I believed what they told me about you. The self-recrimination in his voice broke my heart. You were a child, I said firmly. Then a teenager. They were the adults. The manipulation was not your fault. There was a long silence before he spoke again. Grandma called yesterday. She said she's reconsidered her position and wants to contribute to the wedding after all. But now I understand why. It's never been about generosity. It's about control. She's afraid of losing her influence over me, over us. What did you tell her? I asked. That Sophia and I have the wedding under control, that we appreciate her change of heart but don't need financial assistance. He paused. She didn't take it well. She implied that I was being ungrateful, that I'd regret choosing outsiders over family. Then she said something that really bothered me. What was that? She said, I hope you're not expecting your father to be part of the ceremony. That would be inappropriate given the circumstances. When I asked what circumstances she meant, she said, he abandoned his responsibilities years ago. He doesn't deserve a place of honor. The familiar anger rose in me, the same helpless rage I'd felt so many times over the years as Margaret rewrote our family history, casting me as the villain of a story she'd largely authored herself. What did you say? I asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. I told her that not only would you be at the wedding, but I wanted you to be my best man. I nearly dropped the phone. Your best man? But I thought Marcus understands. He's still a groomsman. But Dad, after learning the truth, I can't imagine anyone else standing beside me. That is, if you want to. For a moment, I couldn't speak past the lump in my throat. The gesture meant more than Tyler could possibly know. Not just the honor itself, but the public restoration of our relationship, the acknowledgement of my place in his life. I'd be honored, I finally managed. More than I can say. Good, Tyler said, relief evident in his voice. Because Grandma is furious. She told Mom that if you have any significant role in the wedding, she might not attend at all. Tyler, I don't want to be the reason for family conflict on your wedding day. Maybe we should— No, he interrupted firmly. I'm done letting her manipulate events. This is my wedding. Sophia and I decide who participates and how. If Grandma chooses not to attend because she can't control the narrative, that's her decision to live with. His certainty both impressed and concerned me. I knew Margaret well enough to know she wouldn't simply accept this reversal of power. Just be prepared, I warned gently. Your grandmother isn't used to not getting her way. I know, Tyler sighed. Mom's caught in the middle, too. She apologized for her part in everything, but I can tell she's terrified of standing up to Grandma 20 years later, and she's still letting her mother dictate her choices. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment, processing everything. Part of me felt vindicated. The years of subtle exclusion and undermining hadn't been paranoia after all. But another part ached for my son, forced to reconsider his entire upbringing through this new, painful lens. The week before the wedding passed in a blur of rehearsals, last-minute arrangements, and simmering tension. Margaret had apparently decided to attend after all, but made her displeasure known in countless small ways, questioning every decision, reminiscing about proper weddings she'd attended, making pointed comments about traditional family values. Stephanie hovered anxiously between her mother and her son, trying unsuccessfully to please both. I kept a low profile, attending only the events Tyler specifically asked me to, careful not to provide more ammunition for Margaret's disapproval. Sophia's family, warm, unpretentious people from Colorado, seemed bewildered by the undercurrents of tension but were unfailingly gracious. The night before the wedding, Tyler asked me to join him for a drink at the hotel bar. He looked exhausted but resolute, his shoulders set with a determination I recognized from my own reflection. Grandma cornered Sophia today, he said without preamble after we'd ordered. Told her it wasn't too late to rethink the arrangements. I made it clear she was referring to your role in the ceremony. What did Sophia say? I asked, already admiring my future daughter-in-law's fortitude. A small smile flickered across Tyler's face. She told Grandma that in her family, they believe fathers belong beside their sons on important days. Then she walked away. I chuckled, imagining Margaret's reaction to such direct resistance from the mild-mannered Sophia. She's a strong woman. You chose well. I did, Tyler agreed, his expression softening. She's helped me see a lot of things more clearly, including how much I missed by letting them push you away. He stared into his drink. I've been thinking a lot about what I found in those journals, about all the years we lost. We didn't lose them entirely, I said gently. They were complicated, but we're here now. He nodded slowly. There's something else I haven't told you. Something I found that makes more sense now that I know the truth. What's that? Tyler reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded envelope, yellowed with age. This was with Mom's journals. It's addressed to me in your handwriting, but it's never been opened. My heart sank as I recognized it. A letter I'd written to Tyler on his 16th birthday. A letter I'd given to Stephanie to pass along. In it, I had poured out everything I wanted him to know about growing into manhood, about my pride in him, about my hopes for his future. It was the kind of letter fathers write when they fear the connection with their child is slipping away. She never gave it to me, Tyler said, answering my unspoken question. There were others, too. Birthday cards, notes, all unopened. The revelation shouldn't have surprised me, given everything else I'd learned, but it still landed like a physical blow. Those letters had contained pieces of my heart, meant to reach across the growing distance between us. Can I read it now? Tyler asked quietly. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He carefully opened the envelope, unfolded the pages, and began to read. I watched his face as he took in words written 14 years earlier. Saw the moment. His composure cracked when he reached up to wipe hastily at his eyes. When he finished, he carefully refolded the letter and put it back in the envelope. "You never gave up on me," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Even when I gave up on you." "I'm your father," I said simply. "That doesn't change, no matter what." He looked at me then, really looked at me, as though seeing me clearly for the first time in years. "Tomorrow is going to be difficult," he said. "Grandma is determined to make her displeasure known. Mom is a nervous wreck. But I need you to know something." He took a deep breath. "No matter what happens, no matter what anyone says or does, I want you by my side tomorrow, where you should have been all along." We finished our drinks in companionable silence, the weight of unspoken emotions hovering between us. As we parted, for the night, Tyler embraced me tightly. Not the quick, perfunctory hug of recent years, but the kind of embrace we'd shared when he was young, before the walls went up. "Thank you for never giving up," he whispered. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and crisp, a perfect early autumn day. I arrived at the church early, as Tyler had requested, and found him in a small side room, adjusting his tie with nervous fingers. "Here, let me," I offered, stepping forward to straighten the Windsor knot. It was a small thing, this act of fathering, but it felt monumental after so many years of forced distance. "Thanks, Dad," he said, meeting my eyes in the mirror. "For everything." The moment was interrupted by a sharp knock on the door. Before either of us could respond, Margaret swept in, impeccably dressed in a slate blue ensemble that probably cost more than my monthly salary. She stopped short when she saw me, her expression freezing into a mask of polite disdain. "I need to speak with my grandson," she said, pointedly ignoring my presence. "Privately." Tyler's posture stiffened. "Whatever you have to say, you can say in front of my father." The emphasis on the word father was slight, but unmistakable. Margaret's lips thinned to a bloodless line. "Very well," she said crisply. "I'll be brief. Your mother is extremely upset. This arrangement," she gestured vaguely in my direction, "has caused her significant distress. On today of all days, I would think her feelings would matter to you." It was masterfully done, the guilt trip disguised as concern, the implication that Tyler was being selfish rather than assertive. I'd seen this tactic work countless times over the years, watched as it eroded his confidence and independence. But not today. "Grandma," Tyler said evenly, "I love Mom. I've tried to consider her feelings throughout this process. But this is my wedding. Dad is my father. He's going to be my best man. That decision is not open for discussion." Margaret's face hardened, the veneer of concern dropping away. "After everything we've done for you, the connections we've provided, the opportunities, the financial support. And this is how you repay us? By elevating a man who contributed nothing to your success?" I felt the familiar sting of her contempt, but Tyler's reaction surprised both of us. He laughed, a short, incredulous sound. "Nothing?" Dad was the one who attended every school event he was allowed to know about, who helped with homework, who taught me to ride a bike and throw a ball, who lived in a tiny apartment so he could afford child support and still take me on modest vacations, who never, ever used me as a pawn in some twisted game of status and control. He took a step toward his grandmother, his voice dropping. "I know everything, Grandma. About the journals. About the plan to push Dad out of my life. About the letters that were kept from me." Margaret's face paled slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Your mother was confused, vulnerable. I was protecting both of you from a man who clearly wasn't. Committed to—" "Stop," Tyler cut her off. "Just stop. You've controlled the narrative long enough. Today, I'm taking it back." He glanced at his watch. "The ceremony starts in 30 minutes. You have a choice to make. You can be part of this day, on our terms, or you can leave. But know this. If you choose to leave, if you make Mom choose between us, you will be the one losing a relationship with your grandson. Not Dad, not anymore." For a moment, I thought Margaret might actually explode with indignation. Her face flushed, then paled again, her hands clenching at her sides. Without another word, she turned and swept from the room, the door closing with a decisive click behind her. Tyler let out a long, shaky breath. "Well, that went about as expected. Are you okay?" I asked, concerned that the confrontation might cast a shadow over his day. He smiled, the tension visibly leaving his shoulders. "Actually, I feel great. Lighter, like I've finally put down a weight I've been carrying for years." He straightened, his jacket. "Come on, Dad. I'm getting married today. And you're standing beside me, exactly where you belong." The ceremony itself was beautiful in its simplicity. Sophia was radiant in a classic gown, her face luminous with happiness as she walked down the aisle on her father's arm. Tyler's face, as he watched her approach, brought tears to my eyes. My son, a man grown, embarking on a life of his own choosing. Margaret attended after all, seated beside Stephanie in the front row, her expression rigidly controlled. Stephanie looked nervous, but managed a genuine smile when Tyler and I entered together. I understood then that she too had been trapped, in her mother's web of control, perhaps even more thoroughly than Tyler had been. As best man, I held the rings, stood at Tyler's side as he spoke his vows, and felt a profound sense of rightness that transcended the years of pain and separation. Whatever happened after today, this moment could never be taken from us. At the reception, I gave a toast that I had agonized over for days, wanting to strike the right balance, acknowledging the journey without dwelling on the past, celebrating the couple without exposing family tensions. I spoke of Tyler's integrity, his compassion, his courage to chart his own course. I welcomed Sophia to our unconventional, imperfect family with genuine warmth. I didn't mention the years of separation or the recent revelations. Today wasn't about settling old scores. It was about new beginnings. As I raised my glass to the happy couple, I caught Margaret's eye across the room. For a fleeting moment, her mask slipped, revealing something that might have been regret, or perhaps simply resignation. Then it was gone, replaced by the polite smile she wore like armor. Later, as the celebration continued around us, Tyler found me at a quiet table near the edge of the reception. He sat down beside me, loosening his tie with a contented sigh. "Happy?" I asked. "Completely," he affirmed, watching Sophia laugh with friends on the dance floor. "Thank you for being here, for everything today. I wouldn't have missed it. For the world." He was quiet for a moment, contemplative. "You know, growing up, Grandma always talked about legacy, about carrying on the Monroe name, upholding certain standards. I used to think that meant following the path she laid out. The right school, the right career, the right connections. And now?" I prompted when he paused. A slow smile spread across his face. "Now I think legacy is about something else. Entirely. It's about integrity, courage, the willingness to stand up for what matters, even when it's difficult." He looked at me directly. "It's about being the kind of man who never gives up on his son, even when everyone else is telling him to step aside." The simple acknowledgement that he saw now what I had tried to be all those years meant more than any formal role in the wedding possibly could. "Sophia and I have been talking," Tyler continued, "about family, about the kind of parents we want to be someday." He hesitated, then added quietly, "I want our children to know you, Dad. Really know you. Not just at holidays or special occasions, but in all the everyday moments that matter. I'd like that, I managed, my voice suddenly hoarse. Mom approached me earlier, he said, changing the subject slightly. She apologized again, said she's been thinking a lot about the choices she made, about allowing Grandma to dictate so much of our lives. I think finding those journals forced her to confront some hard truths. Your mother was very young when we divorced, I said, carefully. And Margaret is formidable. I've never doubted that Stephanie loves you. I know, Tyler nodded, but love without courage can become something else entirely, something that hurts instead of heals. He straightened in his chair, his expression clearing. But today isn't about the past. It's about Sophia and me, and the future we're building together. As if summoned by his words, Sophia appeared before us, her hand extended toward Tyler. May I steal my husband for a dance? She asked, her eyes twinkling. Absolutely, I smiled, watching as Tyler rose to take her hand. Before they moved away, Tyler turned back to me. Dad, would you and Catherine like to join us for Christmas this year, in Vermont? It would mean a lot to both of us. Catherine, the kind, straightforward woman I'd been seeing for the past 2 years, had attended the wedding as my guest, charming everyone with her warmth and complete disinterest in family politics. The invitation to include her in a family holiday spoke volumes about Tyler's commitment to building new, healthier relationships. We'd love that, I said sincerely. As they walked toward the dance floor, arms around each other, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. The road to this day had been long and painful, filled with calculated exclusions and deliberate wounds. But watching my son now, confident, loving, finally free of the manipulations that had shaped his early life, I knew that the journey, difficult as it had been, had led exactly where it needed to go. Margaret might have won many battles over the years, but in the end, truth had prevailed, not through dramatic confrontations or public exposures, but through the quiet persistence of love, the kind that continues to show up year after year, even when the door is repeatedly closed in its face. As I watched Tyler and Sophia move across the dance floor, their faces alight with joy and possibility, I understood that some victories aren't about winning or losing at all. They're about enduring, about holding fast to what matters most, even when everyone else is telling you to let go. In the end, that was my legacy to my son, not wealth or status or social connections, but the simple, powerful truth that real love doesn't manipulate or control. It doesn't need to. It simply remains steady and true, waiting for the day when its worth is finally recognized. And watching Tyler now, confident and joyful in the life he had chosen for himself rather than the one chosen for him, I knew that day had finally arrived. The wedding reception continued late into the evening, a celebration not just of Tyler and Sophia's union, but of truth finally breaking through decades of careful manipulation. As the night wound down, guests began to depart, offering final congratulations to the newlyweds. I stood near the exit, shaking hands and accepting kind words from Sophia's family, who had welcomed me without reservation, despite knowing nothing of our complicated history. Mr. Carson? I turned to find Stephanie standing behind me, slightly apart from the dwindling crowd. The years had been kind to her. At 54, she retained the polished beauty that had first caught my attention 3 decades ago. But tonight, something was different. The confident mask she typically wore had slipped, revealing the uncertain young woman I'd once loved beneath the carefully constructed facade. "Could we talk for a moment?" she asked, gesturing toward a quiet corner of the now empty ballroom. I nodded, curious but wary. Our interactions over the years had been strictly limited to logistics regarding Tyler, and even those had dwindled as he grew older. We hadn't had a real conversation in over a decade. "It was a beautiful wedding," she said, as we sat at a small table littered with abandoned champagne glasses and cake plates. They seem very happy together. They are, I agreed. Sophia's good for him. She sees him for who he really is. Stephanie winced slightly at the implied criticism, deserved as it was. I owe you an apology, she said abruptly. Many apologies, actually, for things I did and things I allowed to happen. I studied her face, searching for the calculation that had characterized so many of our interactions over the years. Instead, I found only exhaustion and what appeared to be genuine regret. Tyler told me he found your journals, I said carefully. She nodded, not meeting my eyes. I should have destroyed them years ago. Or better yet, I should have had the courage to stand up to my mother in the first place. She twisted her napkin between manicured fingers. I was young when we divorced, but not too young to know what she was doing was wrong, what I was allowing her to do. Why didn't you? I asked, the question that had haunted me for 20 years finally finding voice. Why did you let her come between Tyler and me? Stephanie was quiet for a long moment, considering. Fear, mostly, she finally admitted. My mother. She's always been the center of gravity in our family. Opposing her meant being cast out. I watched her do it to my cousins, to family friends who crossed her. I wasn't strong enough to risk it. So, you risked our son's relationship with his father instead, I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. She flinched but didn't deny it. It started small. Little comments about how you weren't reliable, suggestions that your apartment wasn't really suitable for overnight visits. Before I knew it, we were actively working to limit your influence. By the time I realized how wrong it was, the pattern was set. Tyler was already pulling away from you, believing the narrative we'd created. And the letters? I asked. The ones you never gave him? Shame flashed across her face. That was inexcusable. Mother found the first one and insisted I intercept. Any others? She said they were emotional manipulation and would confuse Tyler. She shook her head. I knew better, but I went along with it anyway. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 2 decades of deliberate harm hanging between us. Part of me wanted to lash out, to make her feel a fraction of the pain I'd endured watching my son grow distant under her influence. But another part, the part that had learned wisdom through suffering, recognized that Stephanie had been as much a victim of her mother's manipulation as Tyler had been, albeit in a different way. I'm not asking for forgiveness, she said finally. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that seeing Tyler stand up to Mother today, watching him reclaim his relationship with you, it's helped me see things more clearly than I have. In years. It's not just about me, I said. It's about Tyler. About the years he spent believing his father didn't care enough to fight for him. About the relationship he was denied because of your mother's control and your compliance. I know, she whispered. Believe me, I know. From across the room, I spotted Margaret watching our conversation, her expression a mixture of disapproval and calculation. Even now, at her grandson's wedding, she was monitoring, assessing, planning her next move to maintain control. Your mother's watching, I observed. Stephanie didn't turn around. She's always watching. That's part of how she maintains her hold, making sure everyone knows they're being evaluated at all times. You could break free of that, you know, I said quietly. Tyler has. It's not too late for you either. She gave a sad smile. Perhaps. But old patterns are hard to break, especially when you've been trapped in them your entire life. She hesitated, then added, Tyler invited me to visit them in Vermont for Thanksgiving, without Mother. I'm considering accepting. It was a small step, but significant, a tentative move toward independence that would have been unthinkable, even a few months ago. I think that would be good for all of you, I said. Will you be there? She asked. For Christmas, I replied. Catherine and I. Stephanie nodded, something like relief crossing her features. I'm glad. That you found? Someone, I mean. Catherine seems lovely, grounded. She is, I agreed, thinking of my partner's straightforward nature, her complete disinterest in pretense or social climbing. She reminds me what healthy relationships actually look like. Stephanie winced again, but didn't comment. After a moment, she said, I should go. Mother's getting impatient. She stood, smoothing her dress with practiced hands. Thank you for listening and for never giving up on Tyler, even when I made it nearly impossible for you to stay connected. As she walked away, returning to her mother's side like a planet drawn inexorably into a powerful gravitational field, I felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. Stephanie had made choices that hurt me deeply, choices that damaged our son's relationship with me for years. But she had also been shaped by forces beyond her control, molded from childhood to prioritize appearance over authenticity, compliance over courage. Later that night, as Catherine and I returned to our hotel room, I found myself recounting the conversation, trying to make sense of the complex emotions it had stirred. Do you think you'll ever forgive her? Catherine asked, removing her earrings, as she listened. I considered the question carefully. I think I already have in some ways. Not because what she did wasn't wrong, but because holding on to that anger doesn't serve any purpose now. Tyler and I are rebuilding our relationship. That's what matters. Catherine smiled, the same warm, genuine smile that had first drawn me to her 3 years ago at a teaching conference in Boston. That's why I love you, you know. Most people in your position would still be bitter, would want revenge or at least validation. But you're focused on healing instead. I've had a lot of practice letting go of things I can't change, I said, thinking of the countless milestones I'd missed, the years of limited access to my son's life. Well, I think it's remarkable, she said simply. And I think Tyler sees it too, the difference between your approach and his grandmother's. One is about control, the other is about love. As we prepared for bed, I found myself reflecting on Catherine's observation. Perhaps that was the fundamental difference. Margaret's version of family was built on obligation, appearance, and control. Mine was built on acceptance, support, and the freedom to become your authentic self. For years, Tyler had been caught between these competing visions, pulled toward the one that came with more material benefits and social advantages. But ultimately, he had chosen authenticity over appearance, love over control. The next morning, we joined Tyler and Sophia for a farewell brunch before they left for their honeymoon in Italy, a gift from Sophia's entire family, who had pooled their resources to send the newlyweds on the trip of a lifetime. It was a gesture that spoke volumes about their values, choosing to give experiences rather than objects, creating memories instead of obligations. Tyler seemed lighter somehow, as though the confrontation with his grandmother had released a burden he'd carried for years. As we spoke about their plans for the future, the teaching position in Vermont, the small house they'd rented near a lake, Sophia's work at the regional museum, I saw genuine excitement in his eyes, untainted by the doubt his mother's family had so often instilled about choices that prioritized fulfillment over status. We've been thinking, Sophia said, reaching for Tyler's hand across the table, about building traditions of our own, not just holidays, but everyday rituals that matter. Like what? Catherine asked, genuinely interested. Sunday dinners? Tyler replied, open to family, friends, colleagues, whoever needs a place to belong that week. No pretense, no perfect table settings, just good food and honest conversation. I smiled, recognizing the direct rejection of the formal, performative gatherings that had characterized his experiences with Margaret's side of the family. Sounds wonderful. We'd love for you both to be regulars, Sophia added warmly. Once we're settled. We'll be there, I promised, touched by the intentional inclusion after so many years of calculated exclusion. As we said our goodbyes in the hotel lobby, Tyler embraced me with the same unreserved affection he'd shown as a child, before the walls had been erected between us. "Thanks for standing with me yesterday," he said quietly. "In every way that matters." "Always," I replied simply, feeling the years of distance continue to dissolve between us. After they departed, Catherine and I decided to take a walk through the small New England town where the wedding had been held. It was a perfect autumn day, crisp air, sunlight filtering through trees ablaze with red and gold, the scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves perfuming the air. As we strolled along the town's historic Main Street, admiring the colonial architecture and quaint shops, a familiar figure emerged from a cafe ahead. Margaret, alone for once, a takeaway coffee cup clutched in her hand. She spotted us at TII the same moment we saw her, her posture instantly stiffening into the regal bearing she maintained like armor. For a moment, I thought she might simply pretend not to see us, cross the street to avoid an interaction outside the careful parameters she preferred. Instead, to my surprise, she stood her ground, waiting as we approached. "Daniel," she acknowledged coolly. "Enjoying the town?" "Yes," I replied evenly. "It's beautiful here. I can see why Tyler and Sophia chose it for their wedding." An awkward silence descended, broken only when Catherine extended her hand. "I don't think we were formally introduced yesterday. I'm Catherine Ellis." Margaret took her hand briefly, her assessment almost visibly cataloging Catherine's sensible shoes, simple jewelry, and lack of designer labels. "Margaret Monroe, Tyler's grandmother." "I know," Catherine smiled. "He speaks very highly of your influence in his life." It was diplomatically phrased, not quite a lie, but a gracious bridge across potentially treacherous waters. Margaret seemed momentarily disconcerted by Catherine's straightforward warmth. "Yes, well," she recovered quickly. "Family influence is important in shaping young people's values." "Absolutely," Catherine agreed pleasantly. "Tyler clearly values honesty and courage. Those are wonderful traits to have encouraged in him." I suppressed a smile at the subtle but pointed compliment, attributing to Margaret the very values she had actively worked to undermine when they didn't serve her purposes. Catherine's gentle reproach was all the more effective for its surface: civility. Margaret's lips tightened almost imperceptibly. "If you'll excuse me, I have some calls to make before my flight this afternoon." As she walked away, Catherine squeezed my hand. "She's exactly as you described her." "Formidable, isn't she?" I said, watching Margaret's retreating figure, still elegant, still commanding, but somehow diminished outside the carefully controlled environment she preferred. "Sad, actually," Catherine mused. "All that energy spent maintaining appearances, controlling others, when she could have simply loved her family for who they are." It was a profound observation that Margaret's power had always come at the cost of genuine connection. She had wealth, status, social standing. But did she have the unconditional love of her family? Or merely their compliance offered, out of fear rather than affection? "You know," I said as we continued our walk, "for years I envied her influence over Tyler, the opportunities she could provide that I couldn't match. But now I wonder if I had something more valuable all along." "Which was?" Catherine prompted. "Authenticity," I replied. "I never had to pretend to be someone I wasn't to earn Tyler's love. I just had to be there, consistently, offering whatever I could. It took longer for him to recognize the value in that, but when he did, it was a genuine choice, not one made under duress." Catherine nodded thoughtfully. "That's the thing about manipulation. It might work in the short term, but eventually, people recognize when they're being controlled, and they either break free or break down." "Tyler broke free," I said, feeling a surge of pride in my son's courage. "Because he had an alternative model. Catherine pointed out. He had you, showing him that love doesn't have to come with conditions attached. We spent the rest of the day exploring the town, enjoying the simple pleasure of each other's company, without agenda or expectation. As evening approached, we stopped for dinner at a small local restaurant, the kind of unpretentious place that would never have met Margaret's standards, but offered delicious food and genuine hospitality. Over dessert, Catherine reached for my hand across the table. You know, watching you with Tyler yesterday, the way you supported him without making the day about your reconciliation, the grace you showed toward Stephanie and Margaret despite everything they did, it reminded me of why I fell in love with you. And why is that? I asked, genuinely curious. Because you understand what really matters, she said simply. Not status or appearances or being right, but connection. Being present. Loving people as they are, not as you want them to be. Her words touched something deep within me, the recognition that perhaps my greatest strength hadn't been persistence or forgiveness, but the ability to love without expectation, to offer my presence without demanding acknowledgement, to wait, patiently, for my son to find his way back to an authentic relationship, even as others actively worked to prevent it. Do you think it would have been different if you'd fought harder? Catherine asked, seeming to read my thoughts. If you'd taken Stephanie back to court when they started interfering with your visitation, or confronted Margaret directly about her manipulation. I considered the question carefully. Maybe, but legal battles can create different kinds of wounds. And direct confrontation with someone like Margaret often backfires. She would have used it to paint me as unstable, aggressive, unfit for parenting. I shook my head. The approach I took wasn't perfect. There were times I should have pushed back more firmly. But I think maintaining a consistent, loving presence, however limited, gave Tyler something to come back to when he was ready to see the truth. As we walked back to our hotel under a canopy of stars, I felt a profound sense of closure. The wedding hadn't just been a celebration of Tyler and Sophia's union. It had been the final chapter in a long story of separation and reconciliation. Whatever happened moving forward, whether Margaret continued her attempts to control family narratives, whether Stephanie found the courage to establish healthier boundaries with her mother, Tyler had claimed his independence. He had chosen truth over convenience, authentic connection over social advantage, and in doing so, he had given me the most precious gift a father could receive. Not just his presence in my life, but the knowledge that our relationship was now based on mutual choice, genuine understanding, and unconditional love. The next morning, as Catherine and I prepared to return home, I received a text from Tyler, already in Italy for his honeymoon. Just wanted to say thanks again for everything. Looking forward to building new traditions with you and Catherine. Love you, Dad. 6 simple words. Looking forward to building new traditions. That contained within them the promise of a future I had sometimes doubted would ever arrive. A future where I wasn't on the outside looking in, but an integral part of my son's continuing journey. I showed the message to Catherine, who smiled warmly. New traditions, she repeated. I like that. Not erasing the past, but creating something better moving forward. Exactly, I agreed, feeling a surge of gratitude for this woman who understood so intuitively what others had failed to grasp for decades, that family isn't defined by obligation or appearance or social standing, but by the conscious choice to love and support one another through all of life's complexities. As we drove away from the town where my son had reclaimed his authentic self after years of subtle manipulation, I found myself thinking about legacy, not in Margaret's sense, of social status and family name, but in terms of values transmitted from one generation to the next. What legacy had I ultimately given my son? Not wealth or connections or a path smoothed by privilege. Instead, I had offered persistence in the face of rejection, courage to seek truth even when it's uncomfortable, and perhaps most importantly, The understanding that love is not about control, but about freedom. The freedom to become your most authentic self, supported but never constrained by those who truly care for you. These were gifts that couldn't be quantified or displayed, couldn't be leveraged for social advantage or monetary gain. They were invisible to those who measured worth by external standards, incomprehensible to people like Margaret who saw family relationships as extensions of personal power, rather than connections to be cherished for their own sake. But these invisible gifts had ultimately proven more durable, more meaningful than all the material advantages and social connections Margaret had used to lure Tyler away from me. When the moment of truth arrived, when he had to choose between appearance and authenticity, between control and freedom, he had recognized the value in what I had silently offered all those years: unconditional love, without agenda or expectation. And in that recognition lay my greatest victory, not over Margaret or Stephanie, or the system that had so often favored wealth over genuine connection, but over the doubt and despair that had threatened to consume me during those long years of separation. I had held fast to a simple truth: that real love endures, even when rejected. That showing up matters, even when your presence goes unacknowledged. That consistency and authenticity eventually reveal their worth, even in a world that often values image over substance. As we turned onto the highway that would take us home, I realized that the journey back to my son hadn't been about winning a contest of influence or proving Margaret wrong. It had been about maintaining a beacon of genuine connection in a life increasingly defined by strategic relationships and social calculations. And when Tyler was ready to find his way back to authenticity, that beacon had helped guide him home, not to the father Margaret had described in her carefully constructed narrative, but to the one who had been there all along, waiting patiently for truth to finally prevail over manipulation. In the end, that patience had been rewarded beyond anything I could have imagined, not just with Tyler's presence in my life, but with his conscious choice to build his future on the foundation of genuine connection rather than social advantage. To create, with Sophia, the kind of family where belonging isn't contingent on compliance, where love doesn't come with conditions attached. And in that choice lay the most profound lesson of all: that influence based on control is temporary, but influence based on authentic love endures. That manipulation may achieve short-term compliance, but only genuine acceptance creates lasting bonds. That you cannot dictate another person's path, but you can walk alongside them for as long as they'll allow, offering steady support without demanding recognition. These were the lessons Margaret had never learned, trapped as she was in her need to control rather than connect. But Tyler had learned them, despite years of contrary messaging. And in choosing to build his life and future family around these principles, he had given meaning to all those years of separation and struggle. The road ahead wouldn't be perfect. There would be challenges in establishing new boundaries, in navigating family gatherings where old patterns threatened to reassert themselves. But the foundation had been laid for something healthier, more authentic, a family defined not by obligation or appearance, but by the conscious choice to support each other's growth and happiness. And in that possibility lay hope, not just for my relationship with Tyler, but for the family he and Sophia would someday create. A family where children would be valued for who they are, rather than how they appear, where love would be offered, without strings attached, where the measure of worth would be character rather than status. That was a legacy worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth believing in, even when all evidence suggested it might never come to pass. As the miles passed beneath our wheels, taking us back to the life we'd built, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. The past couldn't be changed, the lost years couldn't be reclaimed, but the future stretched before us, filled with possibilities for connection that had once seemed beyond reach. And in that future lay the greatest victory of all, not the defeat of those who had sought to separate us, but the triumph of patience over power, of authenticity over appearance, of unconditional love over calculated control. In the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything that truly mattered. The months following Tyler's wedding unfolded with a rhythm entirely different from the previous 20 years. Weekly phone calls became a consistent touchpoint. Not the stilted, obligation-filled conversations of before, but genuine exchanges filled with the everyday details that weave the fabric of true connection. Tyler would call from Vermont, often with Sophia joining the conversation, sharing stories about their students, their small but welcoming home, the community they were gradually becoming part of. "Dad, remember how I mentioned those Sunday dinners we wanted to start?" Tyler asked during one of our calls in early November. "We hosted our first one last weekend. Just a few colleagues from school and Sophia's museum, but it felt right. Like we're building something meaningful here." "That sounds wonderful," I replied, hearing the contentment in his voice. "Creating your own traditions is important." "That's the thing," he continued, enthusiasm warming his tone. "All those years of formal dinners at Grandma's house, everyone dressed perfectly, conversation carefully controlled. I never realized how exhausting it was until I experienced something different. Last Sunday, people showed up in jeans. Someone brought their dog. We ate off mismatched plates and talked about everything from politics to poetry, without anyone monitoring whether the conversation was appropriate." I smiled, recognizing his deliberate rejection of Margaret's rigid standards. "Sounds like exactly the kind of gathering that builds real community." "It is," he agreed, "which is why Sophia and I want to make Thanksgiving something similar. Not a performance of family harmony, but an actual celebration with people we care about." He paused. "Mom's coming. Without Grandma. It's the first holiday she's ever spent away from her parents." The significance of this wasn't lost on me. Stephanie taking such a clear step toward independence represented a seismic shift in family dynamics that had remained frozen for decades. "How's she feeling about that?" I asked carefully. "Nervous," Tyler admitted. "Grandma didn't take it." "Well, there have been several tearful phone calls, guilt trips, even a vague health scare that miraculously resolved when Mom didn't immediately cancel her plans." He sighed. "The same tactics she's always used, but I think Mom is finally seeing them for what they are." "That's a big step for her," I observed. "It is," Tyler agreed. "Which is why we're trying to make this Thanksgiving especially meaningful. To show her there's another way to be family." There was a brief hesitation before he continued. "Would you and Catherine consider joining us? I know it's last minute, and it's fine if you can't, but it would mean a lot to have you there." The invitation caught me by surprise. While Tyler and I had been rebuilding our relationship steadily since the wedding, the idea of spending a major holiday together, particularly one that would include Stephanie, was unexpected. For 20 years, holidays had been among the most painful markers of our separation. Days when the absence of my son had felt most acute. "Are you sure?" I asked, wanting to be certain this wasn't simply a well-intentioned gesture that might create tension. "With your mother there." "I've already talked to her about it," Tyler said. "It was actually her idea." This revelation stunned me into momentary silence. Stephanie, who had allowed her mother to orchestrate my systematic exclusion from family gatherings for 2 decades, was now suggesting my inclusion. "She's trying, Dad," Tyler continued into my silence. "I'm not saying one holiday erases 20 years, but I think she genuinely wants to make amends in whatever way she can." After discussing it with Catherine, who viewed the invitation with her characteristic blend of optimism and practical wisdom, we decided to accept. 2 weeks later, we found ourselves driving through the Vermont countryside toward the small town where Tyler and Sophia had begun building their new life. Their home was modest but charming, a century-old farmhouse with wide plank floors and generous windows that captured the spectacular mountain views. As we pulled into the gravel driveway, I felt a momentary flutter of anxiety. Despite the significant healing that had occurred since the wedding, the prospect of spending a holiday with Stephanie brought up complicated emotions I thought I'd long since processed. "It's going to be fine," Catherine said, reading my expression with the insight born of genuine connection. "Remember, this isn't about the past. It's about creating something new." Tyler greeted us with warm embraces, helping carry our overnight bags into the guest room they'd prepared. Sophia was in the kitchen, the scent of roasting turkey and fresh bread filling the house with the promise of shared abundance. What struck me immediately was the relaxed atmosphere. Nothing like the tense, performance-oriented gatherings at Margaret's carefully appointed home. Sophia wiped her hands on an apron and hugged us both. "We're so glad you could come. Tyler's been looking forward to this all month." "So have we," Catherine replied warmly, producing a bottle of wine and a homemade pie. "Now put us to work. What can we do to help?" Sophia's grateful smile confirmed that this would indeed be a collaborative celebration rather than a staged event where guests were expected to admire but not participate. An hour later, as Catherine and I were setting the large farmhouse table with the eclectic collection of dishes Sophia and Tyler had gathered from thrift stores and family gifts, the front door opened. There was a moment of hushed conversation in the entryway, and then Tyler appeared in the dining room doorway with Stephanie beside him. She looked different somehow, less polished than I remembered, her hair in a simple style rather than the elaborate arrangements Margaret favored, her clothing tasteful but relaxed. But the most noticeable change was in her expression, a tentative openness that replaced the careful mask she'd worn for so many years. "Daniel," she said quietly. "Thank you for being here. I know it can't have been an easy decision." "It wasn't," I acknowledged honestly. "But I'm glad we came." Catherine stepped forward then, introducing herself with the genuine warmth that came so naturally to her. I watched as Stephanie responded to Catherine's straightforward friendliness, the tension in her shoulders visibly easing. The afternoon unfolded with a natural rhythm far removed from Margaret's rigidly orchestrated holiday gatherings. Tyler and Sophia's colleagues arrived. A history teacher from Tyler's school with his husband, an archivist from Sophia's museum with her teenage daughter. Everyone pitched in, adding last-minute touches to dishes, rearranging furniture to accommodate the growing group, sharing stories and laughter as though they'd been friends for years rather than months. I found myself in the kitchen with Tyler, preparing gravy while he checked on roasting vegetables. "This is nice," I said, gesturing to the bustling, comfortable chaos around us. "Very different from what you grew up with." Tyler smiled, his expression reflective. "That's intentional. Sophia and I talked a lot about what kind of home we wanted to create. We kept coming back to your apartment, how it wasn't fancy or perfect, but it always felt safe. Real." He lowered his voice slightly. "I never told you this, but even during those years when I was pulling away, when I believed what Grandma was saying about you, your apartment was still the place where I could breathe. Where no one was evaluating whether I was living up to some impossible standard." His words touched something deep within me, the knowledge that despite Margaret's systematic campaign to diminish my importance in Tyler's life, the simple authenticity of our relationship had left its mark. "You know, for years I felt like I was failing you," I admitted. "That I couldn't compete with the advantages your mother's family offered. The connections, the opportunities, the lifestyle." Tyler shook his head firmly. "What you offered was more valuable. You just didn't package it in status symbols and social advantages. It took me way too long to recognize that." He glanced toward the dining room, where Stephanie was helping Catherine arrange flowers in a simple pottery vase. "I think Mom's starting to see it too." When we gathered around the table, an eclectic group united not by social status or family obligation, but by genuine affection. I was struck by the natural warmth of the gathering. "I was just thinking about the power of example," I replied. "How Tyler and Sophia are consciously creating something different from what he grew up with. How even Stephanie seems to be questioning patterns she's followed her entire life." Catherine nodded thoughtfully. "There's something contagious about authenticity. When someone has the courage to live genuinely, it gives others permission to do the same." "That's it exactly," I agreed. For years, I felt like I was failing Tyler by not being able to compete with the advantages Margaret offered. But maybe what he needed most wasn't another person trying to buy his affection or impress him with social connections. Maybe what he needed was someone who demonstrated that there's another way to live, prioritizing genuine connection over appearance, character over status. "And ultimately, that's the example he chose to follow," Catherine observed. "Not because you pushed or manipulated, but because authenticity has a resonance that eventually cuts through even the most carefully constructed facades." The next morning, after a relaxed breakfast where Tyler and Sophia shared their plans for the small vegetable garden they would plant in spring, Stephanie approached me as I was helping clear the table. "I wanted to tell you something before I leave," she said, her voice steady but quiet. "I've been offered a position with a nonprofit in Boston, helping first-generation college students navigate financial aid and admissions. It would mean leaving my father's firm, moving away from my parents' immediate influence." The significance of such a move wasn't lost on me. For Stephanie to consider employment outside the family business, to potentially relocate away from her parents' direct oversight, represented a seismic shift in a life that had been defined by compliance with family expectations. "Are you going to take it?" I asked. "I think so," she said, surprising me with her certainty. "For the first time in my life, I want to discover who I am outside of my role as Margaret and Howard Monroe's daughter, what I'm capable of when I'm not constantly seeking their approval." "That takes courage," I observed. She smiled slightly. "I'm learning that from our son, and, in a way, from you. The path of least resistance isn't always the one that leads to genuine fulfillment." As we prepared to depart later that morning, hugs were exchanged with an ease that would have been unimaginable just months earlier. Stephanie embraced me briefly, awkwardly, but with genuine intention. "Thank you," she said simply, "for showing Tyler a different way to be. He needed that example, even when I was too blind to see it." Driving away from the farmhouse, watching it recede in the rearview mirror with Tyler and Sophia waving from the porch, I felt a profound sense of completion. Not because all wounds had been healed or all wrongs rectified, but because something authentic had finally emerged from decades of calculated manipulation. "You know what strikes me most about this weekend?" Catherine asked as we wound our way through snow-dusted hills. "How Tyler and Sophia aren't just rejecting Margaret's value system, they're actively creating something better to replace it. They're not defined by what they're against, but by what they're intentionally building." Her observation resonated deeply. Tyler wasn't simply rebelling against his grandmother's controlling influence. He was consciously cultivating relationships and a community based on principles directly counter to her emphasis on appearance and social advantage. Authenticity over performance, acceptance over evaluation, collaboration over competition. "That's wisdom beyond his years," I noted. "To recognize that simply rejecting something negative isn't enough. You have to replace it with something positive, something life-giving." "A wisdom he learned from you," Catherine said gently. "Even during those years when contact was limited, when Margaret was actively working to diminish your influence, you were showing him a different way to live, not through lectures or demands, but through consistent example." As we traveled homeward, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. Not just the literal miles between our home and Tyler's, but the emotional distance we had traversed over decades of separation and reconciliation. The path had been neither straight nor simple, marked by deliberate wounds and calculated exclusions, by moments of despair and flickers of hope. But through it all, something had remained constant: my commitment to being authentically present, whenever the door opened even slightly, to offering acceptance without condition, to valuing character over appearance and substance over status. Those values, rejected and dismissed by Margaret as signs of social inadequacy, had ultimately proven more compelling, more enduring than all her wealth and influence. In the end, the victory hadn't come through confrontation or vindication, through legal battles or public exposures. It had come through the quiet persistence of example, showing through consistent action that there is another way to live, another way to define success, another way to be family. And while the future would undoubtedly hold its own challenges and complexities, the foundation had been laid for something genuine and enduring. Relationships built on mutual respect rather than obligation, on authentic connection rather than social calculation, on the freedom to become your truest self rather than the pressure to conform to someone else's expectations. That was a legacy worth creating, worth nurturing, worth passing on to future generations, that they might know from the beginning what had taken us decades to discover: that the most valuable connections are those that free us to become more fully ourselves, not those that demand we diminish our light to maintain someone else's control. As we turned onto the highway that would carry us home, I felt not the bittersweet ache that had accompanied so many departures from brief visits with Tyler over the years, but a quiet confidence in the bond we had reclaimed. A bond no longer vulnerable to outside manipulation because it was anchored in something manipulation cannot touch. The power of authentic love freely given, without condition or expectation. And in that knowledge lay a peace that transcended all the pain of the past, not because the wounds had never existed, but because they had ultimately led to something deeper, truer, and infinitely more valuable than what had been lost along the way. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.